Hi Purvi, thank you so much for agreeing to do this with us. I know like you have a very busy schedule and it was on a very short notice as well. So
I'm
basically,
glad to be a part, Arko. Thank you so much.
thank you so much, Purvi. So what exactly do you do as a psychologist? Because many people don't really know what a psychologist does or like what are the nitty-gritty of the process of giving therapy.
Right. So, when you have any physical issues, you generally approach a doctor.
Yeah.
What happens when you have issues with your behavior, or what happens when you issues with your emotions or thoughts? That's when you would approach a psychiatrist or a psychologist.
Yeah.
Right. So this is where my work comes into the picture. This is the place where you might want to seek therapy or visit a psychologist.
Yeah. Adding to that same question, um, people also don't really know about what's the main difference between a psychologist and a psychiatrist. Like many a times they use them as like replaceable terms that I need to say a
Right.
psychiatrist or I need to say a psychologist. Yeah. So
Right.
can you just
Yeah,
elaborate
that's
on that?
absolutely true. A lot of them would give us a call thinking that we are psychiatrists and not psychologists because they
Yeah.
quite don't know the difference. Basically, a psychiatrist is a person who's done his MBBS, okay, his or her MBBS. That means that they are eligible to give you medications. Whereas a psychologist is a person who will deal with the same issues but via therapy and not via medications. So when we talk about counseling, therapy, that's when you go to a psychologist. A psychologist is a master's in arts,
Yeah.
or masters of science,
Mm.
whereas a psychiatrist is someone who has done the MBBS and is able to help you heal better, psychologically heal you better via medications.
Yeah. Okay. So coming to you, like when did you figure out that you wanted to be a therapist?
So you know how everyone has their callings and they kind of know they approach a certain field. Well, that's not what happened for me. I knew I wanted to get into something interesting, but it did not hit me until I was into my internship, or until I was actually into a job. You know what? Especially in fields like ours, what really happens is theory is one side and the practical aspect is another side. When you start falling in love with the whole practical aspects, that's when you know that, okay, this is probably the place where I want to be. In fact, it's also the other way. Being into therapy, in and out, talking to people is not always easy for everyone. So even if I know of a lot of people who passed out with me, they do not necessarily pursue the career further because they weren't comfortable while they were on the field.
Okay.
So, so it just happened to work for me, I would say.
Yeah. So like same thing that what you said, like some of your peers might have just dropped off from this field after
Yes.
leaving college. Like what's the huge difference that comes in with like you studied the theory about psychology, how to give therapy. Now you have a real client in front of you. So
Mm.
what's the main change that comes in?
So the whole point about application, where it's the real life person, everything is not theoretical. It does not directly go from A to B to Z. It's not so simple. Here we're
Mm.
dealing with emotions, and when it comes to psychology, every individual is different. Every thought in every individual is different, and that particular thought will not necessarily create the same emotion.
Okay.
A thought that I may have and you may have are the same. But what
Yeah.
I feel about the thought may be much different than what you feel. And that's the application part that we are talking about when it comes to theory. Because then you're talking about an individualistic person, an individualistic perspective. Every belief system is different based on different cultures, cultural backgrounds, a person, a subject might come from. So that is the part that actually interests you, if it does, the whole analysis, getting into that part. So
Yeah.
that would make it so much different from theory and application.
So nowadays, like since the pandemic has hit, people have been
Hmm.
confined to their homes. They are focusing too, like slowly they are focusing more on their physical health. So like the term being healthy or like being physically fit is something that's always talked about. But do you think being healthy is only about physical fitness, or like even for physical fitness to go to the gym every day, be consistent? What role is there for being mentally fit, or like being a proper having a proper mental health for that?
Right. You kind of almost answered the question in the there was an answer in the question itself. The
Yeah.
pandemic. The pandemic itself kind of showed us this time how important mental health is. While you were home, you were being provided with food, you had your family around you, you were in your comfort zone, you were doing your work, everything is fine, you're staying away from the COVID because you have a roof under you,
Yeah.
you're not coming in contact with things, and yet mentally you're not feeling better.
Okay.
So in spite of physically everything going, check, 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 you're still not feeling mentally better. And that's when mental health. So this pandemic has actually brought out mental health into the limelight. Everybody has now started to understand, everyone started to feel the importance of mental health so much into the pandemic that I've never seen this kind of a rise I mean, I've been practicing since a decade and I haven't seen this kind of a rise in a year, in 2 years.
Yeah.
Right. So even when you're working from home, you're in your comfort zone. You don't have to travel, you don't have to face the traffic, and yet you're not feeling okay.
Yeah.
There were so many people who took up activities, there were so many people who were exercising, yet they
Mm.
didn't feel okay.
Mm.
Right. So
Yeah.
that's the point where your question comes,
Yeah, I
whether
got it.
physical health is important or as important as mental health. In
Yeah.
fact, both of them are so related. Both of them go hand in hand. Have you ever heard anyone saying, I have fever, I don't feel like doing things,
Okay. Yeah.
you know?
Yeah.
So because you have fever,
Yeah.
mentally it's affecting you.
Yeah.
It
Yeah.
works the other way too. I'm too tired. I'm mentally exhausted, which is why I've started to have feel feverish.
People don't really see the small, like small things in which they actually mention the problems that they're actually facing. Like my day was very stressful. I just don't want to do anything.
There's so many times that we've said, I slept, but I don't feel fresh.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Yeah. Like those are some things that many of us can relate to actually. Yeah.
absolutely, awareness is something that is missing for mental health, and that's the thing.
Yeah. Coming to that awareness topic, like the word awareness regarding mental health as well. It's seen that around 50% of the mental illnesses actually have like sow their seeds, if I may say, like start
Mm,
occurring
mm,
before the age of 14 or by the age of 14, and then around 75% is already has occurred by the age of 24. Like that's alarming numbers for a very young age of the population. Like why do you think this is happening, or what's the major reason behind it, and how can we actually avoid it?
Considering the kind of stigma
Yeah.
that mental health is around, a lot of times a lot of things go unnoticed, they go
Okay.
unreported, right?
Hmm.
We've seen depression in a newborn,
Hmm. In a
right?
newborn.
So in a newborn, yes,
Okay.
the studies have seen, the researchers have said that there are traits of depression in a child who's just born, right? So if so we're
That's something we
considering
didn't.
that. Right, and this is all that we've studied when we were studying.
Okay.
So this is something that it goes back years later. It's not something new. So it's just that when we study psychology, we've come across these stages, psychosocial stages that Eric Erickson mentions. Every single stage of your life, it's a 2 to 3 year stage, and every single stage you either um, accept something and go ahead, move on, or you fail to do something and then you move on to the next stage. Based on those stages, by the time you're 16, 18, you realize that, oh, so for example, your identity, your self identity is kind of developed at a certain age.
Hmm.
Once you've developed that, only then do you start realizing that, oh, something doesn't feel right. So teenage is usually the age, 13, 14. And
Okay.
now I think it's 11 and 12. Teenage is now kind of becoming
Yeah,
11
like the
and
bracket
12,
is shifting. Yeah.
shifting. So I think this is the age where you start realizing that something doesn't seem to be going right. This is the age where
Yeah.
you start realizing, the awareness starts to come in, and that's when you start thinking uh, about your belief system. You start thinking about your culture. You start questioning things. You're very curious about things. So maybe that's the reason why the number of 50% at 14, because that's when
Yeah.
you start realizing that something doesn't seem right now. Until then you were, okay, you're going with the flow, you're trying to understand what's happening to you. It's only at that certain age where it hits you, and then it says that, okay, something needs to be done.
Okay. Um, so like how can you actually avoid like having implications in future from those stages?
So something that all of us, all of my fraternity, my community, psychologists have been doing in this pandemic that I've seen
Hmm.
is psychoeducation awareness. Through their mental health pages, through social media, through just too much of awareness. What is mental health? Why is it so important? Why is it okay to say that I'm not okay? Why is it okay for men to cry? Accept that it's okay for men to cry. So only when people start talking about it freely, that's when the stigma is going to come down. When do people start talking about it? When there is awareness. When
Yeah.
people don't know about it, it's not going to come up. So lots and lots of awareness, and that's when you will start noticing that, okay, this is what it is. Maybe that's when we'll start seeing the percentage come down from 50% to maybe
Yeah.
15%.
So like maybe like incorporating it in the education of children is something
Absolutely,
that's very important.
absolutely, as important as anything. In fact, I remember during my times having value education as a subject. So
Okay.
incorporating things like life skills, life skills is something that you can just have it as a subject. Financial literacy, emotional literacy. Uh, uh, these are the things that you can start having into your education.
All these boards like ICSE, CBSE, they actually make it compulsory to have a counselor in the schools. But like
Right.
if these like the information that you are like talking about right now, that the value system should be there, do you think there's a reason why we are not having any shift in terms of changing the syllabus, maybe the courses?
See, now that's like a whole different topic that we'll have to get into, about what the education system ministry is actually doing
Oh,
when it
yeah.
comes to why these things are
Yeah.
not being incorporated into the education system. But talking about the school counselors, the job role of a school counselor is to kind of help a student out when the child is referred by a
Hmm.
teacher, by a school staff to the counselor, or the counselor identifying issues with children, right?
Uh,
But it doesn't necessarily teach each and every child about, oh, this is what your emotion is, and this is how anger is, and anger should be acceptable. It's just another emotion. You
hmm.
should not be dismissing it.
Yeah.
These are the things that, only when widely put into textbooks will be
Hmm.
accepted, right?
Yeah.
And then there's one school counselor for an entire school. So
Yeah.
so
Plus,
how much can
yeah, like how much can they do? Many schools, because they don't have the budget or because there are not that many counselors, there are counselors working part time for multiple schools as well.
Absolutely. They're working part-times. Then there are school counselors who are made to come on annual days and
Okay.
work when there are decorations to
Okay.
be put up. You have to come for examinations and be a supervisor because we don't have enough supervision. So the role of the school counselor is not being recognized the way it should be. But again, it's like a whole different topic that we
Yeah.
can get into. That is the kind of the awareness is not there. Basically, the
Yeah.
more the awareness, then these aspects are going to obviously you need to widen that gap of the more wider awareness is, the less the stigma gets, and
Yeah.
then
True.
people already know that this is how it is.
Um, Coming to that awareness thing as well, like self-awareness is something that is very important. I feel like since people themselves do not know what they might be going through. So how do you think people can actually identify the triggers for something that they might, like, say I'm flipping in a second on
Mm,
something that somebody tells me. How do I
mm.
identify those triggers, or like how do I relate them with some childhood trauma that I might have gone through?
So, so everyone's gone through trauma, all of
Yeah.
us. They could be minor, they could be major, they could be anything,
Yeah.
right? Most of us get through it, get through life. It's not a problem. You don't even identify it. There are times when they become hindrance into your functioning of life, daily functionings of life.
Hmm.
Your work becomes a problem, your personal life becomes a problem, your relationships, your social life become a problem. And that's when you know that something is going wrong. Like any other physical ailment. I have stomach ache every once in a month. But when do I know that I have to see a doctor? Only when it doesn't seem like the right stomach ache. It seems something odd. It has been going on for days. I'm not comfortable yet. I'm missing work. That's when I seek the doctor. I mean, a lot of people have fever. Not
Hmm.
everybody rushes to doctor. They'll first try their gharelu upchar,
Yeah.
as you might put it.
Yeah.
They start with all the remedies, the home remedies, and then they'll go on to having a paracetamol. If then it still doesn't subside, and that's when you go to a doctor,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So that there are usually a lot of traumas all of us deal with every single time.
Hmm.
Okay,
Yeah.
but the time that you feel that uh, this is not manageable by me anymore, it has started to affect me in a lot of ways. That's when you know that I have to seek therapy. I have to seek professional help.
Yeah. Got now.
Mm.
Like in the last 1 year that we have been building Amigo, in
Mhm.
that we have talked to like clients, therapists, and like conducted surveys. There are some things that we noticed that people gave as a response in terms of uh, for a question saying what do you know about therapy, and like there were widespread misconceptions about what is therapy, what happens in a session, like what does a therapist do in therapy. Sometimes like people have seen like hypnosis on TV and they feel like the therapist like hypnotizes you and they like
Right.
make you talk. So like, can you just elaborate on the misconceptions that
Too
you
many
have
myths,
heard?
too many myths. In fact, the most common myth is understanding that uh, I'm not, in Hindi that you'd call मैं पागल नहीं हूँ.
Yeah.
Or as simply put, I don't think uh, I don't have a mental illness to go and seek therapy. Well, you don't need a mental illness. You
Yeah.
don't even need mental issues as such.
Mm.
As simple as, me not having enough confidence, as simple as I don't think I'm great at making decisions and I don't know why. I want to be better at it. I want to learn
Yeah.
how to solve problems better.
Right.
I want to learn how to have better relationships. I want to learn to manage my anger. I usually find myself very irritated through the day. As simple as that. It could be just as simple as that. So that's one of the major myths that we face. Um, Psychologists are mind readers.
Yeah, that's
That's what would very easily come across. Psychologists or therapists. the moment you meet them. What do you think about me? No, I don't think anything about you. I'm only here to analyze you and your issues based on what information you provide to me.
Yeah.
So therapy is basically a 50-minute to an hour session that usually takes place once a week.
Mm.
And while you're in therapy, you usually come up with issues that you'd like to talk about with your therapist. And when you discuss the issues, the therapist does not give you advice. It only tries to make you aware about some of the corners that you might be missing. It tries to make you more conscious about some things that you're saying but not saying it.
Yeah.
It tries to point, make you aware about your non-verbals that you might be missing. It kind of teaches you to pay more attention towards your emotions, your body language. So often your body is always trying to communicate things with you. I've seen
Yeah.
so many clients who will tell me that, my father hit me while they're smiling.
Okay.
Right. And we do tend to do this very often when we have a prolonged trauma. You're smiling, but you're not supposed to be smiling when you said. So this is the uh, this is the difference between what your body is trying to communicate versus what you're trying to say.
Like
The two different
technically,
things.
you have normalized it to yourself, like to some
Right.
extent.
So there could be thousands of meanings behind it. And the psychologist only tries to explain those meanings to you, trying to make you more aware about yourself, about your issues. So the next time you do it, you're on your own.
Yeah.
You don't every time have to come to your therapist because you're kind of healing yourself. Now you're more aware. So now you're taking a step in that direction, knowing the repercussions.
Yeah. True. Like many of the people sometimes even have second thoughts before taking the first session. They are like, I know I need to see a therapist. I know that I cannot deal with it anymore on my own, but they do not know what happens during the first session, or like how many sessions they might need, or what happens in every session. I know like every client is different. Like every client is different. Everybody has separate needs. But like for a person who doesn't know how therapy works, is there any specific structure in which you can break it down that this is what happens when you first go to a therapist?
So like I said, it's a session that lasts for 15 minutes to 1 hour, where usually the first session is where you're only trying to open up. You're sharing your history, you're sharing what happened to you. The therapist also describes her procedure or how she works or he works or how the therapist what the therapist has done in the past few years. So basically trying to build a rapport. That's what happens in the first few sessions. Over the time, you realize that you've come for a certain issue, a specified issue, but there have been a lot of other issues that are related to that comes out. So you may have just come for one issue, which might take about 4 to 5 sessions, which is like a month. But over the time you realize that there are too many issues that you never noticed.
Yeah.
So it may elongate to about 3 months, 6 months, depending on what the issue is. um, it is it's a very beautiful thing. The therapist is not the person but the client who will know that we come to the end of therapy,
Yeah.
because the client is the person who has now started to notice that day one when I came in, this is how I was feeling, and this is where I am. I'm much more capable. I'm able to deal with my emotions much better. My healing process looks so much stronger now. I'm much more confident. My life seems to go on a better route now. And that's when the client approaches the therapist saying that I think I'm better to fly off. And that's how the therapist helps with the termination. The termination is when you don't immediately end the session, but you end it in a way that it is, it's a slow progressive kind of an end. So you're tempering it basically. So you have a session usually once in a week. Now you start having it once in 15 days. After a few sessions, you have it once a month, and then you'll have it once in 6 months if needed.
Got it. Got it.
That's usually the process. It usually takes anywhere from 2 months, 3 months to 6 months, 8 months to a year to, I mean, I have clients who've now absolutely fine, but they only come and see me maybe once in 6 months or once in a year when they have, something to discuss.
Okay. Yeah. Got it. So
Right.
you also notice that many people take their first session and then they drop off from the therapy process sometimes. So like, why do you think that happens? Is it only because like they have the first session and they themselves get the answers in that session itself by talking themselves, or is it something else?
So you know what? Usually these are the clients who come back to us after, if not 1 year, 2 years for sure.
Okay.
because
Okay.
because they're just they felt that they could do better, because that's usually never happens. I mean, in one session 50 minutes you're not going to get a eureka moment. So even if you do, it's just a eureka moment. You've not kind of sorted your life.
Yeah.
So but these are very few cases where they feel that, okay, my one session and I'm done with it. The dropout would usually be because, one, the therapist and the client are not a good fit, because obviously every therapist cannot be a good fit for every client, right?
Yeah.
So you have to seek for a therapist that could work well for you. Two, talking about India, our insurance does not cover mental health. Because it does not cover mental health, therapy is an expensive affair. So there are a lot of times where the client is not able to continue, or
Yeah.
or it does not feel worthy,
I understand.
materialistically worthy. So those are the reasons why usually we've seen dropouts.
Regarding the first point that you said, like that getting that fit like proper rapport with the therapist as well.
Yeah.
Like it's not like one size fits all kind of situation. It's more like you need to find your perfect therapist. So are there some pointers that someone can look for in order to find the best therapist for themselves?
So it's finding a therapist is as good as finding a doctor for yourself. If you were to find a diabetologist, if you were to find a gastro or a ophthalmologist or a neurologist, what would you do? I'm a layperson. I don't understand, doctory so much. So what do? I go online. I see who the doctor is. I see what the degree is. I see how many years he practices. I see the reviews, right? On those basis, I pick the doctor. After I pick the doctor, what do? I go to the doctor and I see if my questions are being answered. When you sit with the doctor, and if your questions are being answered, if when you sit with the doctor, you feel that he seems like a person who is educated enough to help you out, that's when you know that he's the right fit. And that's exactly how it works for therapy also. When you are on the phone asking the therapist questions like, what have you done, where have you practiced, what are the kind of therapies that you practice, and sometimes people have been to different therapists. So some of them already know that this therapy works better for them.
Okay.
So they find a therapist who is practicing that particular therapy, right? You go to a therapist, eventually you sit in front of a therapist and just see if you are able to connect. Sometimes you're not able to connect. In spite of all the checkers, you're not able to connect when you are sitting in front of the counselor. And that's okay. That's your cue that, okay, this is not working for you. But that doesn't mean that the counselor isn't good enough, or she doesn't have the kind of qualifications that may be needed. Everything is fine, and yet
Yeah.
these could be simply the issues.
So say someone goes for a session, they have taken 2 or 3 sessions. What are like some things that they should be noticing in order to see if they're making progress? Like,
Uh, Usually there's something known as the SUD case, SUD, SUD's scale,
scale.
right?
Okay.
So it's just a rating scale basically when the client actually asks you in the first session. So based on the scale 0 to 10, 0 being, 0 being feeling bad and 10 being feeling good, where do you think you are? And the client might just say 9.
Okay.
The counselor might ask the same question after a few sessions, and the client kind of gets the answer when the ratings are moving towards good. Oh, sorry, I said 9. It
Yeah.
should have been the other way.
Yeah.
So basically, we've had clients and their parents who come and told us things like, she suddenly started to feel a lot more calmer, or it's been 4 weeks, but she hasn't fought with us. It has been, just a few sessions, but my son hasn't come to me and said anything in an irritating way.
Okay.
Sometimes I don't even notice if he's in the same room, but he's much more calmer. He's not aggressive anymore. So those are the kind of changes you would see in the first few sessions, because that's when you know that the healing is taking place. You just feel that there's a different kind of emotional take that is happening to you, whether positive, whether negative. Even if it was negative, there's still a change, right? So
Yeah.
any kind of change is welcoming, because you're not going to have a graph when you're in therapy. You're not going to have a graph that goes directly up. There's going to be ups and downs.
Yeah. Got it. Coming to one last question, like after all of this, in India, like mainly the private mental health care infrastructure, or even a good mental health care infrastructure, is mainly constrained to the tier 1 cities, but is accessible to the people in the tier 1 cities or the metros. Now, however, majority of the people stay in tier 2 cities and beyond. And now, after the pandemic, how effective do you think online counseling can be as an alternative for people who can't access or who don't want to go out and seek help or who don't have the time to do it?
So, very frankly speaking, there's a vast difference when you take online therapy versus when you are face to face. But having said that, it doesn't mean that the therapy doesn't work. It still works. It works pretty well, right? It's just that the percentage, the level of how successful it would be, definitely face to face would have been much better. In fact, the entire pandemic, I've had clients all over the country, right? I've had so many clients approaching to me, Indian, from other countries, right? Because it's pandemic, where do we go? What do we approach? So that is happening for sure. I would have been the first person to say that I'm not going online therapy, but pandemic made it happen. Right. So all of us have now started to be comfortable with the Zoom. We've started to be okay with the virtual sessions.
Okay. Yeah, like that's pretty much it in terms of just making people aware about what mental health is, how they can actually take care of themselves. Like our main objective was to shed some light upon the aspect of mental health care, because there's a lot of content out there about mental illnesses and mental health, but people are like, okay, fine, I got it. What's mental illness? What's mental health? Now, what's mental health care? Like, how do I cure it? So like that, like I'm genuinely.
So there are too many. There are too many articles available online. There are too many strategies everybody's putting up on, social media pages, etc. But these are only a form of distraction. When the severity is bare minimal and you just want to get through your life, or just make your life a little better than usual. That's when you use these strategies. Otherwise, like, all of us keep saying that there's no one size fit all.
Yeah.
So if you're coming to me and telling me I'm feeling anxious, what do? I'll tell you, try this, then this, and this. But the anxiety is going to come back later
Hmm.
until you get into therapy and actually deal with the issue.
Got it. Yeah.
So that's the only time where you're going to feel like, okay, now I think I'm going somewhere.
Yeah. Like genuine in the last 1.5 years that we have been working full time in this domain and like talking to people. Like this one conversation has given me more things. Like I never heard about a newborn baby having traits of depression. Like these things, like it was really fruitful from my perspective as well.
Yeah.
Like thank you so much for like doing this with us.
You're most welcome. I had a wonderful time talking to you.